Greetings, Tutor Edward here to discuss for loops. Today I will be introducing you to for loops, or in this video I will be introducing you to for loops and showing you some common uses for loops. If you haven't already seen my video on while loops, I highly recommend looking at that one first because I'll go a little bit more in detail into how loops are structured in general. This applies to Python. It also applies to most other high-level programming languages like Java, and I believe the C family follows the same conventions. The primary benefit of the for loop is that, or the one that I recognize, is that it doesn't require the explicit declaration of an iterator variable. So I'm going to say it doesn't require an iterator, but it doesn't require the explicit declaration of, and it also doesn't require, again, explicit declaration of an incrementer. So, referring back to my while video, those two things are, those are the two statements that are outside of the while loop, I equals 0, and then inside of the while loop, I plus equals 1. In a for loop, the range function takes care of this for us, and it's a combination of the keyword in and range that helps us out, but basically the range function has, as you can see, the help text popping up right there. It has a few different variables or parameters you can pass, but the most basic one is range stop. You'll see it there, it's the one on top, range stop. And so if I say for I in range 5, then what I'm telling Python is basically, I want a list of 5 numbers starting with 0, so proceeding up until 5, not inclusive of 5. So it's going to give me a list then, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then in means that we're going to traverse that list, and I is going to be the variable that we use. So you don't need to do anything with that I variable outside of a for loop, whereas in a while loop we had to say I equals 0, and then while I is less than 5 to do the same thing. This is essentially the exact same thing. So this right here is the exact same code as this. If I run this code, you'll see that it prints 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 twice over in my Python shell. So that's the basic form of the for loop, and I'm going to refer to this as the traditional for loop, because there's another form that it can take that we're going to look at later in the video, though perhaps I might make a separate video of it. I promise I plan my videos. I promise. I write scripts and I think about it. I definitely put lots of forethought into it. Not sarcastic. Maybe. Okay, anyway, so, here's the equivalent while loop. We're going to get rid of that. The main idea is that, again, the I variable right here, that's all I have to do. I just have to say, for I, for j, or for k, for index, for x, whatever, for whatever in range, and then that variable that I say right there, I, is normally what I call mine. It's a pretty standard iterator or index variable. For I, in range 5, I is going to be the variable that refers to each of the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. As you can see, I say print I, and when it loops over here, it's 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So to change the way that the for loop functions, to essentially, allow you to start at different starting places instead of 0, you want to change the range function. So for I in range, and you can actually accept 2 arguments instead of just 1. So if you provide 1 argument or parameter, it's just the end point, and then it starts at 0. But if you provide 2, it's begin, comma, end. And so if we want to begin at, well, let's say that we want to begin at 0, right, 0 to 5, then we would type that. And that's going to be the exact same thing as this, because the default starting point is 0. So instead, I'm going to say from 1 to 5. And so again, this is inclusive. If you're familiar with math interval notation, it's inclusive of 1, but exclusive of 5. So like that. Bracket in front of 1, and then parentheses next to 5. because we're including the 1, we're going to print 1, but you're not going to print 5. So here's the first one that printed, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 again, and then the second one is printing just 1, 2, 3, 4. Thanks to some editing magic, I now have some nice descriptions here. We have traditional for loop with 1 parameter and 2 parameters, and there's actually a form that requires 3 parameters. And so this is the last one that I'll introduce. That looks something like this. For I in range, and then let's be a little bit more generous here. Let's do 1 to 100. And our final argument, you can see right here, this notation here I believe means that it's optional. Basically, in the first form that we see, it says range stop. That's one form. This is called function overloading, where you give it different, you can create a function and basically define a function with 1 parameter or 2 parameters, or 3, and or accepting different parameters, types, data types. That's called overloading. So essentially these are 2 different range functions. One of them is range stop, one of them is range start stop. But in the start stop one, there's also an optional third, which is step. And so let's say that we wanted to do every other number. What I'm telling the range function now is that I want to start at 0, go to 100, but instead of doing, like in the while loop, remember we had I plus equals 1, what I'm doing now is I'm changing I plus equals 1 to I plus equals 2. So I'm going up 2 at a time. That's the step. So it's going to be 0, 2, 4, and I'm essentially just going to count all of the even numbers from 0 to 100. I'm not sure if 0 counts as an even number, but whatever. I'm a little bit imprecise here. So let's go ahead and run that. So a little bit more editing. Let's run it, and boom, there we are. Prints everything that we want, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and so on. I will not read out the entire list. Again, note that it doesn't include 100. If we wanted to get, all the multiples of 3, then we would do this. 0, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and so on. Let's see what happens if we start it at 1. So now it's doing 1, 4, 7. So it's adding 3 every time. It's not looking for multiples of 3, it's a step. So it starts off at 1, then it adds 3 to that, which gives us 4. And so this is, the traditional for loop with 3 parameters. So I'll format that again, and boom, there are our 3 basic forms of the traditional for loop.